The third category of Illustrator brushes are called art brushes. The way you can find them is by going to either the options bar or the brushes panel and then click on libraries menu. And from here, the art brushes are scattered around into these categories. You will find some of them under arrows, you will find some of them under artistic, and you will also find some under decorative. Now let me start here actually, so I'm going to choose decorative, banners and seals. This opens up the category and I can have a look at all of these brushes inside it. If I select one of these banners, let's just say the second one, and I use the brush tool, I can already start drawing with this, and you can see straight away the way it works. So let me draw another line, and each time I draw with this brush, it's going to stretch the same artwork along the path that I'm drawing. So if I draw something like that, it can still create the same shape, but it's going to stretch it along the whole path. Just like everything else in Illustrator, because it's all vector based, I can always swap these brushes around. So I can use the same path, but replace it with another art brush. We can replace it with that one, we can replace it to another one, and of course we can go into other categories as well. So if I again go back to the libraries, we will find a lot of other art brushes under artistic category. So here we will find paintbrush, for example, and from this category we can choose straight away the first one or second or third, and you can see exactly what happens. Once again, the saved artwork, which is this pattern here, is stretched along this path. Now just to prove this to you, I'm just going to make a little bit more space here, and I'm going to use the brush tool, and I will keep the same style selected, that one, and I draw a shorter line, then I draw a longer line and an even longer one, and as you can see, nothing really happens apart from this artwork being stretched. Each art brush of course has their additional settings, which I'm going to show you in a moment, but first I show you how to save your own custom art brush. So to have something that we can save, I am going to start with something very simple, maybe a rectangle. So I'm just going to select the rectangle tool and I draw a rectangle. I'm going to swap the colors around, so I press Shift X and I might just adjust the size slightly, something like that. Now, if I use an effect on this, let's say stylize scribble, and we turn on preview, this is how it's going to look like with the settings that I have here, but of course I can always make it different. Let's just turn it into something like that. Stroke width, I guess that can stay the way it was. I'm going to keep it up, maybe 1 pixel would look nice. Now I'm going to click OK. So the effect is enabled, but we still need to expand the appearance before we turn this into a brush. Otherwise it won't work as you would expect it. So if I go to the object menu, I can choose expand appearance. Now it became a simple outline, and this can be then simply placed into the brushes panel. So that's how you normally create a new brush. So you drag and drop in there, and of course you choose the right type, which is the art brush in this case, and then we can click OK. Now here are the options that I was talking about, where most importantly you have to choose what type of scaling you need. You can scale proportionately or stretch to fit the stroke length, or you can stretch between guides. I'm going to show you each of these. So if I choose first of all the default option, the stretch to fit stroke length, we will see exactly how that will work. So I'm just going to delete again, or maybe just move things around a bit just so we have space. So that's the default or the original design that we have, but now I'm going to select that brush that we just saved and I'm going to draw with that. So if I draw, you will see exactly what happens there. It is stretching that design along the path that I created. So if I create a longer one, something like that, you can see again it's exactly the same design but stretched along that wavy line that I created now. I could even draw knots and so on and so forth, and it would still be able to follow that shape. So this is how stretching works. It's exactly the same what we saw here on the bottom left. Now let's try the scaling option. If I double click on the brush definition from the brushes panel, I can change the scaling option to scale proportionately. And because I have preview on, I can see already this happening on the other strokes. If I click OK, it will actually ask me whether I want to leave the previous ones the way they were, or I want to apply these changes to them. For now, I'm just going to keep them as they were. So I'm going to say leave strokes. So they reset back to a stretched version. And now let's try this new option, so the scaling. So if I draw a line in similar length to the original one, then it looks almost exactly the same. But if I draw something, let's say twice as long, then instead of stretching it, Illustrator is going to scale up the whole brush definition to allow the whole path to be filled with the design, but without stretching it. And the third option, if I again go back to the definitions, was the stretch between guides, which again I'm just going to show you on this design just so we can compare them to each other. So here, if I drag these guides, I can define save zones. So let's say I want to define the tail and the head, the beginning and the end points, as save zones, and I tell Illustrator to only stretch the area in between the two guides. So that's like a restricted area on the left and the right, which is not going to be stretched. Anything in between can be used to stretch the design along the path. So this is more similar to the second option, the stretching option, but it is limiting it with the guides that we can place on the beginning and the end points. It doesn't look that great with this design, but you can see it shows it on all of our previous strokes as well. Once again, of course, if I click OK, again I can decide whether I want to leave my previous designs the way they were, or I want to apply it to all of the previous ones, the change that I've done here. Again, I'm just going to say leave strokes. And instead of using this feature here, I prepared an illustration on which it will make more sense to use this stretch between guides option. Since it was Chinese New Year recently, I was inspired and I drew this dragon, which will work quite nicely with this technique. So what I will do is I select this whole illustration and I drag and drop it into the brushes panel. Again, I'm going to choose Art Brush, click OK. And for this design, of course, it makes sense to use the stretch between guides option because I don't want the head and the tail details to be stretched. I only want the actual body, which I intentionally kept very simple, to be used for stretching. So I'm going to set it up something like that. I have to be careful not to include any detail from the head and the tail. And then I'm going to click OK. So now this is saved. And if I zoom back a bit, maybe show the whole artboard, and I'm going to select that brush that we just created, I can draw the design and you see immediately what happens. So if I zoom a little bit closer, we can see that the detail is still there, but I can draw the dragon in any shape and form, and it's going to always follow the path that I create. The cool thing is that you can even use this on shapes. So if I draw a circle and then I select the dragon, I can create a dragon biting its own tail, something like that. And also another cool thing is that we can change the color of the design, of course. So if I select this and I change the stroke color, it won't actually update unless it is set to a different option within the brush settings. So I have to double click to get back to the options, and the colorization method has to be set to one of these options here. I normally use the hue shift, which will immediately show up here as well, and then I can click OK and I can choose apply to strokes. So now if I go into swatches, let's say, and I select the stroke color, I can very quickly colorize the dragon. And the good thing is that all the future brushstrokes will inherit the settings. So if I now continue drawing with the same brush, I can already see the colors showing up. Now there's just one last thing in the settings. If I go back to brushes and I double click on settings, you can see that we have options for direction. This can also be updated and changed. So if I change the direction and I choose apply to strokes, they will all change direction. And in the future, again, if I keep drawing with it, now it's going in a different direction. And these were the most important settings that I wanted to show you. And feel free to play around with this dragon design. I have the file available, so you can create your own brush and play around with the settings on it. But I would like to also recommend to try all the other categories from the libraries that I mentioned. So for example, artistic watercolor is again another set of art brushes, and they look amazing and it's great to work with them. In the next video, I will show you another interesting category called bristle brushes.